want to tell you a story about my son when he was about 13. So I reviewed his report card, and it wasn't stellar, let's say, although it was fine, but it wasn't stellar. And so I asked him about that, and he said, "Well, Dad, I'm doing pretty well. I'm doing really well for a boy."
Right.
And I thought, I'd never heard him say anything like that. And it was certainly nothing that he had picked up at home. And it was quite striking to me because for him, that was just matter of fact. And of course, that's a deep rabbit hole, because when your son comes to you and says, "I'm doing pretty good for a boy," if you have any sense, the first thing you think is, where the hell did that come from? And right. So seriously, because now that's an implicit presupposition that the boys underperform the girls. That was certainly not a presupposition when I was his age. And it wasn't anything that was appropriate for him, because there's nothing wrong with his mind or his conscientiousness. And so, I've observed that boys the school system is not set up for them in the least. The vast majority of teachers are not only female, but infantilizing female and radically left. Boys' play preferences are denigrated. They're required to sit for hours at a time, which is not in keeping with their nature, especially if they're active, in which case they get diagnosed with ADHD and get put on methylphenidate, which suppresses play behavior as one of its primary functions. And then they're told that competitive games are wrong because we should all cooperate, by people who are too stupid to notice that competitive games are cooperative because everybody's playing by the same rules. And then they're told that boys' ambition is pathological, and that the patriarchy and marriage, for that matter, is an oppressive institution. And if they manage to escape from all that, then they're told that the activities of males are destroying the planet. And that's pretty much a comprehensive evil queen pathology as far as I'm concerned. And it's not bloody well. Then you add to that, there's an additional twist too, which we should delve into. It's a universal cultural problem to make adults out of juvenile males. That's why there are initiation rites in so many cultures. And you have to create a responsible man. And the reason for that is that it's a hell of a lot easier to be irresponsible and immature than it is to be responsible and mature. And
for men and women. For men and women, yeah.
Right. Well, the thing about women is once they have an infant, that kind of catalyzes the maturity. And maybe their nature has a proclivity to initiate women a little more dramatically than it initiates men. So the fundamental problem that cultures face is how to make men out of boys and how to stop young women from getting pregnant out of wedlock. That's the anthropological evidence. And so the boys face I think, a virtual conspiracy of demoralization. And that seems to me to be, that's underneath the political, but the Democrats have been playing that hand madly for, I'd say, 4 generations. And now they're reaping what they sowed.
Yeah, there's a lot in there. Let me go kind of step by step, and let me begin with one thing that I think you articulated right off the top, that is, I think, a very important disconnect that is happening. So a lot of this articulation you hear from the extreme left, and you laid out the way there are folks on the extreme left who just comprehensively demolish masculinity. Now, I'd say most boys have not been exposed to that in school. That might be you might see that in some hyper progressive prep schools or whatever, but some degree of that, some element of that is coming and leaking through and permeating through a lot of American culture. And one of the things that I have seen is that a lot of the people, when we talk about this, when we raise this issue, a lot of people in the commentary and the commentary class and the academic class immediately denigrate a lot of the evidence about the struggles of young men and boys because they don't see in their milieu, they don't see men struggling because they're in places where it might be, say, elite academia or high-level corporate work or in the military or government where men are still at the tip of the spear, at the apex of kind of American commercial and political and economic achievement. Men are still doing quite well. It's the big, giant number of people who are not in that sort of tip of the spear who are really struggling. And because so many of us live in these bubbles, a lot of people don't see it at all. They don't see it at all. And this is something that I think is endemic in our commentariat, and that is a lot of our commentariat lives and eats and breathes a very rarefied cultural air, and they don't have any real world sense of the way that people are living their lives and the struggles they're facing outside of that milieu. And so when you walk into and you start talking about how these young men are struggling, a lot of times you get I've been in these rooms where people immediately dismiss you. Well, disproportionate number of men are CEOs, a disproportionate number of men are in Congress, you name it. And I'm like, I'm not talking about the tip of the spear here. I'm talking about millions upon millions of people, regular Americans who are struggling. And in many ways, they're not struggling because of you, but are you helping or are you hurting? And I can tell you right now, if you're telling men that, for example, traditional masculinity ideology is inherently toxic, you're hurting. You're not helping. And I tend to have an explanation of the struggles of young men that's rooted in a lot more than ideology and politics. It's rooted in changing economies and changing technologies. A lot of things changed in a way that left men in a position where they would often feel like I'm not as necessary, I'm not as needed as I was. A lot of the raw strength, that raw physical strength, for example, that men have, became less and less important to be a part of a vibrant economy. Military is shrinking. The US military is much smaller right now than it was at the height of the Cold War. A lot of these things created dynamics where men felt less needed. And then you have another part of this cultural world that then jumps on men who are feeling less needed, who are not elitists, who are not tip of the spear or regular everyday folks who are just trying to do their best, and are coming in and saying, well, a lot of the things that you feel or a lot of the way that you are is just bad and wrong. And so that created this environment in this sense where I'm struggling and an awful lot of people don't care. And that I feel like is just a giant cultural disaster